Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Gani. So today I'll be talking about lymph and the lymphatic system. So we could start with how lymph is formed. So firstly, we're dealing with tissue fluid. Tissue fluid is basically formed when the liquid part of the blood leaks out of the blood vessels and into the spaces surrounding the blood cells. This happens when the liquid this comes from the liquid from the blood plasma. The blood flows through the capillaries and it leaks out of the capillaries through tiny gaps into the surrounding spaces of the cells. This is known as the tissue fluid. So although the blood pressure in the capillaries is much lower than in arteries, the water from the blood vessels could still force its way out of the blood vessel and into the surrounding space surrounding the cells. This is again the tissue fluid. So small molecules and water could pass through the tiny gaps. Big cells like your red blood cells will remain in the blood vessel, and white blood cells could squeeze through the gaps to pick up any foreign objects and remove any pathogens that's not supposed to be where they are. So tissue fluid helps substances such as glucose and oxygen pass from the tissue fluid into the cell. So it's like a transition zone basically for glucose and oxygen. So you move from the blood vessel to the tissue fluid to the cell. Other waste products now, such as carbon dioxide and other waste such as urea and lactic acid, passes out of the cell into the tissue fluid and into the blood vessel to be transported and excreted. So blood pressure decreases as the blood moves through the capillary going along to the venous system being your veins. And when this happens, the water move back. So before you had the pressure being higher in the capillary, so the pressure pushed the fluid out of the blood vessel and into the tissue fluid, into the tissue spaces where the tissue fluid would have formed in the spaces surrounding the cell. Now we have the opposite happening where the blood pressure is decreased now, so you have the tissue fluid now pushing back the fluid from the tissue fluid and into the blood vessel to be transported back. So this reabsorption occurs by osmosis, where water moves from an area of higher concentration to lower concentration. So the problem with that is not all fluid is reabsorbed back into the blood, and the rest of it has to be passed through a alternative drainage system, and this alternative drainage system is the lymphatic system, which we will be talking about. So basically, the lymphatic system absorbs all the excessive fluid that did not go back into the blood vessels to be transported back. So this is done by little blind ending capillaries that basically surrounds the cells and lie close to blood vessels. And these blind ending meaning it like this is the capillary and this is the end, just so it's like little finger like projections. So blind ending capillaries that absorb the remaining liquid from the spaces surrounding the cells to be drained. So these are called lymph capillaries for the absorption of the excessive fluids. So the fluid flows constantly from the plasma to form tissue fluid, and then like about 90% of that is reabsorbed into the plasma back with the rest, and the rest of it, so the remaining 10%, drains via the lymphatic system. Points to note: the lymphatic system is not part of your capillary system. So there's your capillary system that goes from arteries to capillaries to your venous system, and then the lymphatic system now starts with the blind ending lymph capillaries. The lymphatic system is not as obvious as your blood circulatory system, but you can feel lymph nodes in common areas. So in a case where you have a infection or swollen tonsils known as tonsillitis, you could have swollen lymph nodes. So these could be felt right underneath the jawline. These are known as your submental being here, and your submandibular lymph nodes. These could become swollen with any viral-like illness or infections. So these lymph nodes that you could feel like little lumps, these lymph nodes are connected together by lymph vessels. So that's basically how your lymphatic system works, is nodes connected by little lymph vessels. So tiny valves allow flow of tissue fluid in one direction only when it enters the lymph capillaries. The wall of the capillaries have what is known as clefts on them, which allows lymph fluid to enter, but it cannot leave the lymph capillary. So it's like a one-way mechanism. The capillaries join up together. So just like how capillaries for the blood system join to form arterioles, which then joins to form arteries, similar to the venous system, where the smaller veins, the venules, join up to form veins. This is how the lymph capillary system works. So you have the lymph capillaries joining up to form lymph vessels, and these are thin-walled vessels in which lymph flow in one direction only, because there are semilunar valves preventing the backflow of blood. There's no pump in the lymphatic system, so the flow of lymph is slow. Surrounding muscles is what causes the lymph to flow, because it squeezes the vessel and makes the lymph flow. So it gives it like a propellant mechanism. So when the muscle contracts, it basically pushes the lymph through. The smaller lymph vessels join into two large lymph vessels, and these empty into the subclavian vein just under the collarbone. This is your collarbone, this bone right here. So that is where the lymph vessels join and empty. So eventually the lymphatic system will join back to the venous system to empty the lymph fluid to be drained. So, and again, this happens when the small lymph vessels join in two large lymph vessels. So small lymph vessels join to make large lymph vessels, and these empty into the subclavian vein just under the collarbones. Here now the lymph mixes with the blood before joining the vena cava. So the vena cava is a big vessel carrying deoxygenated blood to your heart. So the lymph mixes with the blood before joining that big vessel, just before entering the heart to be pumped and waste to be excreted. So other things to note is that lymph nodes are filled with what we call lymphocytes, and this is basically a type of white blood cells that during an infection their numbers increase to make antibodies to fight off the pathogens or foreign objects. the antibodies leave the lymph nodes. So again, the lump like things under the neck. You have lymph nodes not just under the neck and jaw area. You have lymph nodes being present by your ears, in the front, the back, under your arms, in your groins. You have lymph nodes all over. So these lymph leaves these lymphocytes leave the lymph nodes and enter the blood, the actual blood. So when it enters the blood now, the lymphocytes could travel around the body to the site of the infection and help fight the infection. So some lymphocytes circulate around the body in the blood, basically patrolling, like blood police, basically patrolling for invasion of pathogens. So in a case where there is one, it will just clean up the mess. So basically that's your body's mechanism of fighting infections. The lymphatic system is a very important part in your body's defense system. So I hope things clear so far in terms of the lymphatic system. Okay, some other points. So sometimes the drainage of the tissue fluid, so leaving the spaces surrounding the cells now to drain into the lymph vessel, becomes blocked. So when this happens, the tissue fluid builds up, leading to swelling. This is known as edema. So in like older people, you could see that there's swelling by the ankles, and when you press it, it kind of leaves an indentation. So this is edema, where the tissue fluid is collecting because the lymph capillaries is blocked. So that's just some points to note there on how edema takes place. So moving on to key points, just some key points. So just like a recap, basically, when tissue fluid enters the lymph capillaries, it is termed lymph. Lymph consists of plasma, white blood cells, but it has no red blood cells or large plasma proteins because they can't pass through the tiny gaps in the capillary walls to get out of the capillaries. The capillaries meaning the blood capillaries, not the lymph capillaries. The lymphatic system has a separate circulation which returns lymph to the blood. So like I said, you have the small lymph vessels join up from the two large lymph vessels which empty into the subclavian vein and then the vena cava, and this is pushed along by contraction of muscles. So that is that point. And then there's lymphocytes in the lymph nodes multiply during an infection to produce antibodies which helps to fight infections. So it's like your body detects, let's just say, a bandit in the blood. Lymphocyte is the police, and the police multiplies to catch the bandit. So that's basically how that works, the defense mechanism part. So you have your lymphocytes detect something foreign that's not supposed to be in the body, multiplies and attacks and clears up the infection. That's how your mechanism of defense in the body works. So in a nutshell, that was everything for the lymphatic system. I hope this video was enjoyable or knowledgeable. So until next time.